This is a 2019 Ram 1500 Limited, and it is the newest full-size pickup truck on the market. It's also the most luxurious. This one has a sticker price of a shade over $65,000, which is an enormous amount of money for a truck that isn't a heavy-duty or super-duty model. Today, I'm going to take you on a tour of it. I've borrowed this Ram 1500 from Ram of Ontario here in Orange County, California, where they have a wide selection of new Rams in all sorts of different colors and trim levels and body styles. But I chose this one because it's the Mac Daddy, the top-end version, the one that people are really excited about in places where they wear cowboy hats to the grocery store. And just what makes it so special? Well, to start, this is a Ram, so that means big power. This truck has the optional 5.7-liter Hemi V8, which makes 395 horsepower and 410 pound-feet of torque. In the right configuration, that powertrain in this truck can pull almost 13,000 pounds, which is massive. But it's not just about muscle. This truck also has a lot of luxury features, being that it's the limited model. For instance, it has air suspension as if it were a Mercedes-Benz or a Range Rover, and there's a lot of other luxury features and gadgets inside. All that stuff leads to that sticker price of over $65,000. So today I'm going to take you on a tour of the new Ram, and I'm going to show you all of its interesting quirks and cool features. And then I'm going to get it out on the road and drive it, and then I'm going to give it a Doug score. Now I'm going to start the quirks and features on the inside of the new Ram Limited, where you climb inside and you're immediately greeted by some very upscale trim. You'll see it on the doors, the center console, and also on the dashboard. If you look closely, what you'll see is that this trim is designed to mimic stitching, even though it isn't stitched itself, but it is a very nice look. It almost looks like a chalkboard, and it also feels nice to touch. Now, next up, even though that trim is designed to mimic stitching, there's also a lot of actual stitching in this truck, and there are some rather unusual designs. On the door panel, you can see there's this odd little decorative stitching design, which is kind of interesting, but there's also another one on the center console around the word limited. There's this whole decorative design stitched into the console. It's the same story in back. On the rear door panel, there is this stitching decorative design, just like in the front, and on the back of the front seats, there is another decorative piece stitched in there so the rear passengers can enjoy their view of the stitching. The stitching goes so far that even the grab handles are leather wrapped and hand stitched. That's what you get when you buy the top-end Ram. Usually it's just a plastic piece you grab onto to get in, but in this vehicle, it's an opportunity for leather and stitching. Next up, I really love the floor mats in the Ram Limited. You see, it's a truck, so they have to give you rubber floor mats in case you're wearing work boots and trekking mud inside, but it's a luxury truck, so they also have to give you nice carpeting. So they figure, well, what do we do? I don't know, and they decide, well, to do both. So the floor mats in this truck are rubber, but the center part is nice carpeting in order to accentuate the fact that it's both a luxury truck and a work truck. Now, next up, we move on to the center console, which is absolutely massive. You open it up and you look inside and you'll see there's some outlines of pickup trucks. What exactly is that? Well, it's the last 4 generations of the Ram outlined, so that if you want to look at the Ram and see its history, all you have to do is open up your center console, and there is the history of the Ram going back like 40 years. It's a weird feature. I'm not exactly sure why it's there, but it is kind of a funny little Easter egg that most people probably won't notice unless you've seen this video. And it's the same story with the lid of the center console. On the inside or the underside of the lid, you open it up and you'll find, well, a lot. In the upper right, you have trigonometry ratios for sine, cosine, and tangent, plus the Pythagorean theorem. Then there's a protractor for measuring angles and a ruler. This is in your pickup's center console, mind you, followed by a standard to metric wrench conversion chart in the lower right and a fraction to decimal conversion chart right above a big Ram logo and the words "Designed in Auburn Hills, Michigan." It's a lot of information in an unlikely place. And speaking of the brand logo, let's move on to the steering wheel, where you will see that the middle of the steering wheel, of course, has the Ram logo on it. Although it looks different from Ram logos in the past, this one appears to be more, I don't know, digital or modernized. It looks like a new face for the Ram logo. Now, it's worth noting one logo you won't see on this truck is the Dodge logo. For the last, I don't know, 7-8 years, Chrysler has been trying to convince people that Dodge and Ram are now different. This is technically only called the Ram 1500, and there's no longer a truck called the Dodge Ram. That's gone. Ram, according to Chrysler, is no longer the model name. It's now the brand name. It's supposed to be the truck brand in the Chrysler, Jeep, Dodge, Ram portfolio. And so technically, this truck is not the Dodge Ram anymore. It is the Ram 1500. Next, we move on to the gauge cluster in this vehicle, which is rather intense. Now, when you turn it on, it says limited right under the word Ram, so you know you got the most expensive Ram. You didn't skimp and get some chintzy lesser version. Now, take a look around that gauge cluster and you can see there is really a lot going on. You have the main dials that show the tachometer and the speedometer, and then they're sort of like connected in this cool way to the dials that show the temperature and the fuel gauge. It looks really cool, but there's also a screen in the middle, and so it really ends up being pretty busy in there. And another interesting item in the gauge cluster, if you go to vehicle settings and scroll through a few menus, you can see the engine's hours. If you'd prefer to measure the engine's usage and wear in hours rather than miles. As you can see, this one has been idle for 3 hours and moving for 3 hours, and maybe that's more useful to someone than how many miles it's gone. Now, next up, I mentioned that this truck has air suspension, and indeed it does. And not only does that improve the truck's ride when you're going over bumps, it makes it much smoother and softer, but it means that you can set the truck to various different ride heights. In fact, you have 5 different ride height options. Now, the interesting thing is Ram has named them in rather unusual ways. It's not just high and medium and low. Instead, if you put it in the highest possible setting, that's called maximum ground clearance air suspension. Makes sense. You put it in the next setting, it's called increased ground clearance air suspension, increased over normal. The middle one is rather unusual. That's called suitable for most situations air suspension. Not normal, not standard, but which air suspension are you in? Oh, I'm in suitable for most situations. Okay, you're good then, for most situations. The next one down, just below the middle setting, is called improved aerodynamics, and this is maybe the most interesting of the settings. When you're driving along in suitable for most situations, you just set it in that, you cruise along and everything's fine. But you get on the highway and you get up to a certain speed, the truck will automatically lower itself one setting into the aerodynamic suspension setting for better fuel economy. This is a pickup truck that automatically lowers itself at a certain speed for better fuel economy. We're in a very different world of pickup trucks from just a few years ago. Finally, the lowest suspension setting at the very bottom is called lowered for entry and exit air suspension, and you can lower it for easier entry or exit.
And you don't have to be in the truck to do that. Press this little button on the bottom left of the key fob and the truck will automatically lower to make it easier for you to climb inside.
Next up, we move on to a couple of other interesting items in this interior. I want to start with the glove boxes. Now, you have a regular glove box in the normal place, but if you look above that glove box and over to the left, you'll see there's a button. You push that and it opens an upper glove box. So in this truck, you have dual glove boxes, just in case you simply have too many gloves to put into one. Another interesting item in this vehicle, now if you're towing and you're going down a hill, you'll probably want to go into a lower gear to take some of the stress off your brakes. Now, in old trucks, you would put in the clutch and shift into a lower gear with the gear lever. In this thing, you just tap a little minus button on the steering wheel. If you've ever been looking for a good example of how trucks have gotten more luxurious and user-friendly over the years, there's all this stuff in the interior, but that may just be the best example possible. Next up, we move back to the center console for another interesting item. At the very furthest forward part of the center console, you can see there are 2 little pockets. Well, that is for cell phone holding. The one on the left is actually a wireless charger. You can just drop your phone in there and it will wirelessly charge. The one on the right is just for storage. But regardless of whether you're storing or charging, it's a good place to put your phone while you're driving so it's not on some flat surface so it flies around if you have to slam on the brakes quickly. Now, next up, we move on to the ceiling, but by the mirror, there are a couple of interesting items up here. There are a lot of buttons that open stuff. I'm gonna start with this button that says open, rear, close. You push that and the rear window opens right up. And a lot of older pickups, it's a manual sliding thing, and this thing, it's automatic. The 3 buttons to the left control the sunroof. This is a pickup truck with a panoramic sunroof. There are not too many pickup trucks that have that, but the craziest button up there is the one at the very back. It's a logo of a pickup with the tailgate down, and yes, if you push it, the tailgate automatically goes down. I know I'm gonna get emails from people that say, back in my day for a pickup truck, you pulled down the tailgate, you had to grab it and yank it down. It was a man's job. Well, now you can just push a button and it comes right down. Times have changed. Now, next up below the giant screen in the middle, you can see over on the right there are two switches to turn off the parking sensors. Now, interestingly, in this vehicle, you can turn them off individually, the rear and the front. You can turn them off separately from each other. This is actually a really good idea because if you're towing a trailer and you have the rear parking sensors on, every time you back up, it'll think you're about to hit your trailer and it'll beep like crazy. So you can shut off the rear and keep the front ones on because they're still useful. And since I've now mentioned the giant screen, I suppose we must talk about it. This is a 12-inch touchscreen that's in the higher end versions of the new 2019 Ram. It is absolutely massive. I think only Tesla in this industry has a bigger screen. Maybe the Volvo screen is about the same size, but it's huge, it's responsive to your touch, and it does just about everything. The screen hosts Uconnect, which is what Chrysler calls its infotainment system. And the previous version was really good, but this version is even better than that. It remains one of the absolute best infotainment systems in the industry, and this screen is a great way to display it. Now, as you might expect, there are a couple of interesting items with the screen. I'm going to start with the screen themes. If you go into themes, you can see there are 4 different options. You have Ram 1500, Longhorn Black, Longhorn Brown, and Limited. Now, why would I, a Limited owner, want anything other than Limited? The answer is, I wouldn't. I would never stoop to the level of those other screen themes. Next up, another quirk of the infotainment system. You have the ability in this car to customize units. For example, you can change between miles and kilometers, gallons and liters. That's not all that uncommon. Most vehicles have that. The interesting thing about this one is when you go into customize speed, if you click on it, it then says below that speed. So it says speed and speed. But if you're still confused, you can press the little I on the right for information, and the information it provides you is the word speed. So speed, speed, speed. I hope you understand what that means. Next up in the infotainment system, a cool feature. This car has a blind spot monitor like most high-end cars. It lets you know if there's someone in your blind spot so you don't accidentally change lanes and hit them. But this vehicle has trailer towing blind spot monitors. You hook up a trailer and this thing will automatically detect how long the trailer is and thus sort of adjust itself to figure out where your blind spots are. So it can inform you if there's a vehicle in your blind spot, even if you're towing a trailer and your blind spot is in a different place than it normally would be because of the way that your mirrors are adjusted. Next up, another interesting quirk of the infotainment system. You go into the settings menu for the brakes and you can see there's an option for brake service. You click on it and it asks if you want to retract the parking brake so you can perform a brake service. That's because this car has an automatic electronic parking brake. Every time you put it in park, the parking brake goes on and it clamps down on the rear brakes. And so in order to retract the parking brake, you have to go into the infotainment system, press that, it will retract, and then you can change the brakes. That's pretty interesting. Next up, moving on to the navigation settings, which is home to some of the infotainment system's strangest quirks. I'm going to start with points of interest and specifically ATMs. If you click on ATMs, it gives you a list of banks to select which one you want your ATM at, and look at this list of banks. I believe it is comprehensive globally. There have to be 200 banks on here. Banks in India, Central Bank of Oklahoma, everything you can possibly imagine is on this list in case you want to search for your local bank ATM. The crazy part is, even after all those banks, it still gives you an option for other. So if somehow your bank doesn't appear on that list, you can still click other and get directed to other bank ATMs. And it's the same story with restaurants. You go into the restaurants menu in the infotainment system and you can scroll through an almost unending list of different types of food you can choose from if you want to see a nearby restaurant that serves precisely what you want. Interestingly, Swiss is on this list. What do they serve at a Swiss restaurant? Is it just like a normal restaurant, but cleaner? And everybody eats their dinner in 36 minutes precisely so they can go home and trim their hedges into an exact rectangle? The next interesting item in the navigation settings is vehicle icon. You can choose how you want your vehicle to be displayed in the navigation screen. You can choose between blue arrow, which isn't an arrow at all, red arrow, which is an arrow, yellow hexagon, or my personal favorite, Ram 1500. I don't know why anyone would choose anything else. Another interesting navigation setting, you can choose a speed limit warning. That's pretty common. You can set it for like 10 over the speed limit, and it beeps at you if you're going 10 over, so you make sure to know not to speed too much. The weird thing about this car is you can set it for up to 20 over, or you can set it for up to 20 under. So I guess it'll beep at you if you're going too slowly. The weird thing is you can set it all the way to like 3 miles an hour under the speed limit. So if you're going 32 and a 35, it'll beep at you to let you speed up. I've never seen a speed limit warning for below the speed limit before, but this car has it. Another interesting quirk of the infotainment system, in this truck, if you want to dim the mirror, you do it through the infotainment system. It's not just a little button on the mirror you push so it's dim at night when the lights are shining. You actually have to go into the infotainment system, press mirror dimmer, and then that will dim the mirror. It seems like overkill to me, but what do I know? Now, here's an even crazier one. This vehicle, like most full-size trucks, when you open the door, the running boards automatically extend so that you can step on them and get in, close the door, and the running boards retract back into the vehicle for extra ground clearance. But here's the crazy thing. If you want to extend them without opening the door, you can go into the infotainment system, push a little button, and they automatically extend. I have no idea why anyone would want to do that, but if you're showing off for a friend that your truck has power running boards, you have that option in the infotainment system. Now, one other item on the screen I also like, in case you're not the touchscreen type, Ram also gives you some traditional buttons for items that you'll use pretty commonly. For example, you can still adjust the climate controls using traditional buttons on the left side close to the driver, and you can turn on and off the stereo and adjust the volume using a traditional dial next to the touchscreen. Unfortunately, Ram is still using this feature where the gear lever is a rotary dial directly next to the volume control. And so you could be driving around and turn down the music and all of a sudden shift into park by mistake. Now, I've been informed by people, well, you can't shift into park because you have to have your foot on the brake. It would never happen. Yeah, but you can shift into neutral. And that's not really all that much better when you really think about things you want to do on the interstate. Next up, moving on to the back, there's not much especially interesting or unusual back here, but there are a couple of items worth noting. One is just how roomy it is. It's a pickup truck. The front seat is most of the way back, and yet I am totally comfortable back here. I have a ton of room. And on the subject of comfort, one other interesting thing, this truck has heated rear seats, pretty common in luxury vehicles, but it also has ventilated rear seats, which is not common in any luxury vehicles. In fact, you don't even get this on most Mercedes S-Class models unless you get really high-end versions and certain rear seat option packages, but you get it in the Ram 1500 Limited. One other interesting item in the back seat, hanging from the back of the front seat, is a Ram leather care guide to teach you how to care for your nice leather interior. The thing I like about this little leather care guide is the word limited is embossed even on this thing. It's not just printed, it's actually pushed into the cardboard, I guess to really emphasize how limited it is. Next up, moving around back of the trunk, there's a couple of interesting things back here. One is on the tailgate, you can see that the Ram logo is that same sort of modernized, digitized Ram logo like the one you saw on the steering wheel. It's very different from the Ram logos of yore. I'm not sure if that's interesting, but anyway, opening the tailgate, which of course happens automatically, you can see the other interesting thing. There are bed lights in this truck, as there are in most trucks, but in this one, they are LED, and you can turn them on and off with the push of a little rubber button over on the left side of the bed in case you don't want your bed lights to be lighting up your bed anymore. Next up, we move on to the front end, which I have to admit I love. It's very sleek and modernized compared to the look of the old one. In fact, it's this new front end styling that I think makes the Ram the best looking full-size truck on the market right now. Take a look, for instance, at the turn signal when it's on. This is not like old school halogen truck turn signals. This looks like a sleek kind of sporty car instead. It's a cool look. Now, there are a couple of interesting things up front beyond just the styling. One is they've gotten rid of the old Ram crosshairs grille that all the old Ram pickups used to have. You can see that is completely gone in favor of this new grille, which is kind of busy and a little bit strange looking. The other interesting thing is the headlights. Now, when you look at these headlights, these are LED headlights. In fact, they're bi-LED, low beams and high beams. When you take a close look at them, it says Dynamic AFS bi-LED, and it gives the exact degrees of inboard and outboard rotation in the headlights. Once again, if you needed any proof that pickup trucks are different than they were 15 or 20 years ago, there you go, Dynamic AFS bi-LED. So those are the quirks and features of the new Ram 1500, and now it's time to get it out on the road and see what it's like to drive a $65,000 luxury pickup truck. All right, driving the Ram 1500. Now, the first thing you realize when you're in this is it's pretty big. Unless you're used to driving trucks, in which case it's totally normal, but I'm not. Boy, the first impression is it's really smooth. The transmission is really, really, really smooth. Just shifting in first, second, third right there. Acceleration is good, obviously, but it's not insane. Obviously, that isn't really the point of this vehicle. Still, it's a V8 under there, so you got enough power for whatever you need to do. The transmission is just so smooth. You can barely feel the shifts. Also, I think that contributes to it not feeling as fast. They've sort of tuned it more for smoothness than for performance, but I think that's probably what most buyers of this vehicle will want. The other thing is the ride is really nice. This is the kind of thing you could just kill miles in. You could just sit here and live here and just not care. The lane line bumps are always a great indication to me of how good the suspension is. In my car, you feel every lane line bump, my AMG, and it's just tiresome. And in this thing, you can barely feel them. Air suspension longevity, there's obviously a concern. Who knows how long it's gonna last, but while you still have this thing under warranty and you're buying it new, it's what you want. It's so nice. Truthfully, it feels like a big luxury SUV. That's what it feels like when you're driving it. Like a really nice Durango or a really nice whatever, GL or something like that. Not quite on that level, but not that far off. All the materials are so nice. You look around and everything is surprisingly good for a pickup truck. All of the noise is pretty much drowned out. You really don't hear all that much. You do hear the engine a little bit under acceleration, but that's kind of cool. You got the Hemi. You got it for a reason. But mostly you just don't hear anything. I mean, this is just a serene place, which is hard to imagine saying about a pickup truck. It really wasn't that long ago that the nicest trucks were like, oh, he's got leather in a truck. Oh, they got wood trim. I mean, that was 15 years ago. And then the Denali's kind of started coming out and then everybody started doing it. And now here we are driving a $65,000 truck, and it almost seems like the perfect combination of things. It's like a pickup truck if you need a haul or tow, but it's also a luxury car and it's a family car because it's huge back there. I mean, this isn't an S-Class. The materials aren't that nice, but it's also nowhere near that expensive. But it's nice, and it's got a ton of tech. I didn't really cover that much of it, but it's got all the latest safety tech. It'll stop automatically if you're about to hit something, and has radar cruise control, auto wipers, et cetera, et cetera. It'll even stop if you're in reverse and you're gonna hit something. There's sensors back there, and it'll brake automatically if you're in reverse. For some reason, the turn signal stalk doesn't come out far enough, so you have to kind of reach in to grab it. In the end, I mean, it's pretty much what you expect from a real. It's pretty much what you expect if you're going to pay 65 grand for a truck. At that point, you want it to also be a luxury vehicle. You want it to be as quiet as one, as comfortable as one, and as well equipped as one. And that's exactly what this is. I mean, you got a panoramic roof, you got cooled rear seats, it recognizes the speed limit of the road you're on, a heated steering wheel, radar cruise. What else do you want? I mean, this is everything. And so that's the 2019 Ram 1500 Limited. The old Ram was fine, but it wasn't really built all that well, and the design seemed like it had been around for ages. The new Ram is a totally different truck. It's luxurious to drive, it's nice and handsome to look at, and it's loaded with all of the latest modern technology and gadgets. I love the Ford F-150, but this is the new best full-size pickup truck on the market, and it's a pretty damn good luxury car too. And now it's time to give it a Doug score.
Starting with the weekend categories and styling, the Ram 1500 is nice, but it's no beautiful sports car. It gets a 5 out of 10. Acceleration is surprisingly strong at around 6.4 seconds 0 to 60, and it gets a 3 out of 10. Handling is typical to pickups. This truck is all about comfort, and it's quite large, so the center of gravity isn't very low. It's not exactly tight or precise, and it gets a 2 out of 10. Fun factor 2 isn't really the point of this truck, and it gets a 1 out of 10. As for cool factor, it depends where you are, but the basic gist is that it's pretty cool to have a top-end truck like this, but otherwise it pretty much just blends in, and it gets a 3 out of 10 for a total weekend score of 14 out of 50. Next up are the daily categories, starting with features, and this truck is surprisingly well equipped for a pickup. It gets a 7 out of 10. Comfort is excellent, just shy of Range Rover territory, and it gets a 7 out of 10. Quality is good, the materials are surprisingly nice, but of course shoppers will be a little leery of Chrysler reliability, and with good reason, so we'll see how that goes. For now, it gets a 6 out of 10. Practicality is strong with a huge back seat and a big bed in back, and it gets an 8 out of 10. Finally, there's value. This truck is an amazing combination of a heavy-duty hauler, a high-tech new car, and a luxury vehicle, so it's a great value. But with that said, it's still a $65,000 truck, so it's not going to get an ultra-high score here, and indeed it gets a 7 out of 10 for a total daily score of 35 out of 50. Added up, and the Doug score is 49 out of 100, and here's how it ranks against some other big pickups I've reviewed. This thing is in a different league than the Nissan Titan. It's far better, and it's a bit better than the F-250 Platinum, unless you need that truck's heavy-duty towing or hauling capabilities. But the Ram can't reach the Raptor, which scores impressively well in daily and weekend categories, though the Raptor has a hefty price premium over the Ram.